Mercedes' highly anticipated 2023 Formula One car, the W14, has been unveiled, with the team promising bold solutions to rebound from a disappointing 2022 season. So let's get right into it and look at the new car, what the team predicts for the season, and where they need to improve if they want to return to the front. Mercedes launch and narrowing down on issues. The W14 is expected to re-establish Mercedes as a title contender, succeeding the W13, which was a race winner, but also Mercedes' least competitive offering of the hybrid era it has otherwise dominated. The W13 had huge weekend-to-weekend pace variance and suffered from crippling porpoising at first, but improved throughout the season. Mercedes suggested it had narrowed down the single design flaw that doomed its 2022 season, which was thought to be related to the floor design, and strongly implied it would stick with its unique side pod concept. The W14 has now been revealed, with renders of what Mercedes calls an earlier iteration of the design, with a more up-to-date physical car, revealing that the narrow side pods have indeed been retained, among other eye-catching features such as the inlets and new profiling at the top of the engine cover. We have done all the things that we wanted to do with the W13 last year, but weren't able to because of resource constraints or because our focus was elsewhere fixing other issues, said Technical Director Mike Elliott. The all-black livery is a return to the style that Mercedes adopted in 2020 and 2021 as an anti-racism message, and it is also part of a significant project to reduce overall weight by leaving so much of it in bare carbon after weight limit struggles last year. Team principal Toto Wolff stated, "We were overweight last year. This year we have tried to figure out where we can squeeze out every single gram. So now history repeats itself. You will see that the car has some raw carbon bits along with some that are painted matte black. Of course, when we changed the livery in 2020, the main driving factor was to support the diversity and equality causes which are always close to our heart. The color black became part of our DNA at that point, so we are pleased to return to it." How has the new car changed? The side pod concept was the major visual difference between the Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes last year. Ferrari has stuck with its concept, albeit with some tweaks, and we haven't seen the Red Bull in detail yet. But the big question has always been whether Mercedes would change. Now that we've seen the W14, we can say that it has maintained its 2022 philosophy for 2023, albeit with some changes. At this point, any technical analysis of the car comes with a disclaimer that we can only judge it based on what we've seen so far. F1 teams have duped the world before and will no doubt do so again. But we've at least seen the real car and can judge the direction taken. Nonetheless, we make some educated guesses. Whereas Ferrari's new SF23 is merely an evolution of their previous design, much of the original concept of their 2022 single-seater has also been to the extreme in the new one. However, when it came to the W14, we had a completely different reaction. That is, while there are visible and even tangible differences between the W14 and the W13, these do not appear to be the result of taking concepts to their logical conclusion. For Ferrari, the Maranello engineers began with a strong base performance, which proved to be successful during the previous season, but improvements to maximize potential were still sought after. The situation was completely different for the W13. In fact, last season's Mercedes proved to be a difficult car to extract the performance that was only seen in simulations. In essence, when approaching the W14 project, the Brackley engineers could not imagine pushing the previous concepts to their limits. Instead, they could only find solutions once they understood the reasons for the W13's lack of competitiveness. As a result, we can say that sticking to the W13's zero pods concept was an unavoidable choice, or at the very least the most rational one to make. In practice, abandoning the concept, for example to move to a Red Bull concept, would mean starting from scratch, completely cancelling the work done in 2022 to make the previous concept work. The decision to continue, albeit with a different profile of the inlets, represented continuity in favor of a reduction in learning times for the dynamics of this model. The differences discovered, while noticeable in some areas, such as the engine hood, are in fact collateral. But as always, things could change over time. Even Toto Wolff admitted that he was still proud of last year's car, but that the appearance of the side pods could change as the season progresses. "I think it's important to be bold in this sport," said Wolff. And the narrow side pod design is not something that we believe was fundamentally the reason why we didn't perform. There are no holy cows in our concept. It's not that we don't want to follow anybody's ideas. We kept staying with the narrow side pod as it is, but you could well see some development from now on that could be coming with the upgrades. And the side pods will change. Not very soon, but we are looking at solutions. But it's not a core fundamental performance part as far as we can judge. In terms of suspension, the previous status quo was maintained without any particular note of differentiation. It is therefore obvious, as with all the cars, that the major difference can be hidden in the bottom, which, as is well known, is the area where 70% of the car's performance depends. Toto Wolff uncertain when Mercedes will regain its position as a frontrunner. Mercedes has been widely predicted to return to the fight for wins and the championship this year. But comments from senior figures suggest that the team may rely on upgrades that unlock more performance to do so, rather than expecting to lead from the start. Mercedes mobilized every reserve it had to counter its limitations in 2022, according to Wolff, and he expects a lot of effort, motivation, and energy to launch a car that will eventually be competitive enough to fight at the very front of the grid. Expanding on his choice of eventually when speaking to the media, Wolff said, "So I was contemplating about that word for 15 minutes when we talked about the press release. Because on one side, you want to say we will be competitive. On the other side, you need to stay humble and realistic, so you could be saying, I hope that we will be competitive. And the midway roundhouse is we will be competitive. We just don't know when." And that was the eventually. I think we are on the slope that we wanted to be in terms of our performance, but then you don't know where the other ones are. And I think humility is most important. We've always tried to be humble. And especially after last year, we need to remind ourselves we were quite far off for a long time in the season. The two things Mercedes must improve if they want to be at the front. So, if Mercedes isn't going to be amazing from the start, what should they work on throughout the season to get there? Well, we went to the trouble of identifying two major areas on which the team could choose to focus. Mercedes is likely to stick with its narrow side pod design throughout the year, as it emphasized several times last year that it was not the source of the W13's problems. However, one particular issue it caused was due to the stiffness of the floor. Because of the difficulty of what they've done with the narrow side pod, there was a large cantilevered floor to manage, as well as the stiffness of that. Maintaining rigidity becomes more difficult as more of the floor edge is exposed. And with the ground effect rules, a floor that's less stiff will amplify any porpoising. This was a bigger issue for Mercedes in the first half of the year, and while it was able to stiffen the floor last year, it came at a cost. As a result, achieving a better balance on the 2023 car will be critical. We've also heard Mercedes talk a little bit about the engine deficit it perceived in 2022, which was worked on throughout last year, but will undoubtedly be a focus over this season. Though Mercedes no longer seemed to be the standard, the actual deficit was only about a tenth. Even so, that's not negligible. And though engine specifications are frozen in terms of performance updates, software tweaks and reliability improvements that allow the engines to be run harder are still possible. Mercedes high-performance powertrains boss Hywell Thomas hinted at the end of last year that work done through 2022 would have long-term benefits. So it's safe to assume that work in that area will continue, given that the same engines will be used until the end of 2025. In the end, Mercedes' new car may not have been the incredible overhaul that some expected. But team comments indicate that there are some encouraging signs, even if they were careful not to overblow expectations. But what do you think about the Mercedes car launch? Will the team be able to resolve their issues and rejoin the fight for the championship this season? Please let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and subscribing. Be sure to click the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. Thanks for watching.